week involves chapter 8 of your little brown handbook. But since this directly relates to what you're doing today, I thought it was worthy of a little bit of preview. So if you'll please minimize. Thank you. Now, a lot of this stuff is what we've been talking about arguments and things. And the first part of this, I think you can pretty much get from the book. So I'm going to go kind of fast over the first part. And then I'm going to add some stuff at the end. I'm going to focus more about the fallacies and visual arguments at the end of the chapter. If you need more about this chapter, remember that you can download and listen to a full-size narrated version of this thing at home later if you feel like you need it. Okay, so basically, you've got claims, evidence, and assumptions, which are elements of argument. And then it talks about how to recognize them and test them. How to tell the difference between opinions, facts, beliefs, and prejudices. And then how the author defines a term versus how the dictionary defines a term. Connotation versus denotation. It talks a little bit about how to weigh evidence and how to judge its reliability. It also talks about discovering any assumptions that the author may make, and as well as things that we've talked about as far as rhetoric, watching how they express themselves and hearing the tone of their writing. And then judging whether or not it's reasonable. Okay? So I'm going to concentrate today on fallacies and visual arguments. Chapter 8 has some fallacies that are the same as chapter 17, and then it does have a few extra ones. So if you're going along and you're trying to categorize your ad by its fallacies, some of them are, you can find even more of these in the Little Brown Handbook. It categorizes them into a couple different categories. One of them is evasions. So a type of evasion is a begging the question fallacy, the non sequitur, the red herring, which is, let me back up, that's one that isn't in the yellow book. A red herring, just like in a mystery, is one that is meant to deliberately lead you off track. It looks like the right answer, but it's not. So like in a mystery, it would be, it looks like this person did it when somebody else really did it. So a red herring is meant deliberately to throw you off track from the real conclusion. And then, of course, false authority and inappropriate appeals to emotion. That's a kind of an expanded wording for that emotional appeal. But they call it evasion because they call it inappropriate. So sometimes it's overdone, or sometimes it's just really over-exaggerated. And then, of course, bandwagon. There's a new one, ad populum. Bandwagon is doing it because everybody else is doing it. Ad populum is a little bit different. It's because everybody has the same belief system. Or there's doing it because the belief system that everybody else has dictates what you should do. So it's a little different than bandwagon, which is based more on action. Ad populum is based a little more on values or ethics. It also classifies things into oversimplification. Things like hasty generalization, a sweeping generalization, which is a different one. It's different from hasty generalization because hasty generalization is a stereotype. Remember, I went over all this stuff on Tuesday. But a sweeping generalization is saying that the whole group is going to act the way one person from that group does. So it sees one person as an example and assumes the whole group is going to act just like that person does. There's a reductive fallacy, which is basically, it's faulty causality, but it's more basic than that. What it does is it takes that cause and effect relationship and breaks it down to its simplest form of one cause and one effect, rather than multiple causes to one effect or multiple effects from one cause. So the reductive fallacy oversimplifies an argument that could and should be more complex. There's another new one called post hoc, and post hoc is another Latin term that basically means just because something happened after something else doesn't mean that second thing was caused by the first thing. So just because B occurs after A does not mean A causes B. Does that make sense? Okay. Then of course the either or, we've already talked about that one. And also false analogy, comparing two things that are not alike. If you would like to, you can go to page 199 in the electronic version of your book, and you can look up on the side of page 199, there's a little flower that says exercise, and if you click on that, there's an exercise where you can actually practice classifying these fallacies. They'll give you some examples, and they'll ask you to classify the fallacies. So if you're interested in doing that, that is there on page 199. Yes?
How do you get to the online version of your book?
There are login instructions in the very, very first news section that I posted.
Okay.
So if you can't find that, let me know after class tomorrow. All right, so visual arguments. Next week, for some of the homework, I'm going to ask you to read chapter 14 of Everything's an Argument. Guess what that's about? Visual arguments. So some of the information should be, I hope, the same between both books, because what I want is you to get the same information from two sources, which validates them both, rather than having them conflict, which makes it kind of discredits both of them. So hopefully you'll get some of the same information, but from a different approach from both books. Visual arguments are just like written arguments, only you're looking at a picture or a sequence of pictures and judging from the visual elements in that picture whether or not it's persuasive. So you can test the claims the same way, but you can use different elements. You can look at how the picture is composed or how the commercial is sequenced. You can look at what it contains. You can look at any language that's used in the picture. You can weigh evidence as far as if it's a commercial or if it's an ad or something. You can weigh the evidence that's given as far as why this product does what it's supposed to do. And then you can verify the facts by observation or by research, so you can use comparative analysis if you want to. And then, I hate that when I'm clear across the room. Don't you hate it when that happens? At least the computer didn't go poof this time, that's a good thing. So, a lot of times examples in an ad will reinforce or illustrate a point, and it's done visually. So you're going to use that same kind of rhetorical analysis where you examine something by looking at what its parts do. You can do that with a visual argument too. And that's all rhetorical analysis is. It's just looking at what makes up something, examining each part for its role, the role that it plays within the piece of work. So it could be any medium you want. You can also look at how the piece of art or the photograph or the ad appeals to a set of beliefs or needs of its target audience. So if the target audience is, let's say you're looking at that Doritos ad from the Super Bowl that has with the goat. Do you see that one?
Yes.
Okay, who do you think the target audience is for that commercial?
Guys.
Probably mostly guys, right? Not too concerned about being on a diet. So, does that ad appeal to the beliefs or needs of that specific audience? Probably. I'm sure they saw an increase of sales because of that. So think about how evidence from that ad could appeal to a specific audience. And ask yourself, is the evidence accurate? Is it relevant and adequate? Do you have enough evidence? And does the evidence represent the context? You have to think about how the target audience is going to perceive that ad, or how the picture is going to be viewed by its audience. So, when you're thinking about assumptions that the author makes about the audience, it's going to take the form of figuring out who the readers are or who the viewers are and where they will see that argument. So If it's an ad on the floor in the grocery store, most of those are down the cereal aisle, and most of those are geared toward kids, because a lot of the ads are there at the eye level of kids, so they can draw their parents there. So these people assume that kids are going to be looking more at the floor than their parents will. You can also look at what readers already know about the subject. So if it's a topic like politics, you can think about what the composers of the ad or the makers of the poster or whatever already know about the subject and what they expect their audience to know. And then they will also be thinking about how familiar their audience is with the purpose, format, and style of their visual argument. So this is what these advertising guys think about all the time. They think about who's going to look at their ad, who their target audience is, what they're focusing on as far as the needs and desires of their audience, and then they also look at how the purpose and format and style of their ad is going to appeal to that group. And then it also asks you to think about whether or not the target audience is likely to lean toward the argument's claim. So if the target audience is a group of housewives, then is it going to be more likely that they'll buy this form of paper towel that you're advertising because it's more absorbent? They're also thinking about what kinds of information, ideas, and images that their audience will find persuasive. There's a whole bunch of stuff. That's why they do all that market research, because they want to know what the readers know about the products and what their experiences have been. And then they put all of that information into composing that ad or that poster or photograph. So when you're recognizing fallacies, like oversimplifications and evasions, think about how that applies to a visual argument like in your ad. If you want to try this without having, a formal thing like your paper, there's an exercise on page 210 that will allow you to integrate the fallacies into those visual arguments. And I'll actually show you pictures and ask you to categorize into fallacies and work that through as practice. So if you'd like to do that, it's the online version of the book. It's on page 210, and there's a little exercise icon in the margin, and you can look at that if you want to. Questions, comments, sarcasm, anything? Snarky remarks?
So how do you analyze commercials that basically have nothing to do with the product?
Well, that's probably your biggest fallacy there is going to be faulty analogy,
Okay.
because it's comparing two things that aren't alike. So like, for instance, those Geico commercials. The only thing that at Gecko has to do with insurance is the fact that Geico and Gecko sound alike. But that's the only link there is. Because really and that little guy is everywhere.
Yes.
So they do a lot of saturation with that. And they use a lot of that sentimental appeal with that little guy because he's so darn cute. And he has that adorable British accent.
I thought it was Australian.
Is it Australian? Okay,
Yeah.
well, it sounds British to me. But anyway,
Maybe even New Zealand.
I guess it could be either one. Other questions? All right. So now